Tales from the Riverbank, Episode 9, Carry on Camping. Lenin was quite a lot taller than people think, a bit like David Beckham. So both of them would have had trouble getting into our new Quecho self-assembly air tent, which quite frankly is their loss because, as a piece of portable accommodation, it's absolutely amazing. Tricky to fold away again into its attractive carrying case perhaps, but in terms of assembly, it's child's play. That's not to say you should let your children play with it, because they could do themselves a nasty injury, and the last place you want to spend your first night away is in intensive care with a child with a swollen eye. No, do what we did and spend the opening night of your holiday driving around Bayonne looking for the duty vet with a dog with a dislocated hip in the back of the car. At this point, I should make it clear that Charlie's injury was not the result of a camping accident. I'm not suggesting that Quecho's self-assembly air tent is in any way dangerous for dogs. I'm quite sure that the nice people at Decathlon, like all responsible companies, have thoroughly tested their products on animals before introducing them into the market. Charlie's injury was the result of a strange set of circumstances sometime after we had put up our tent and fastened it securely to the floor of a campsite on the outskirts of Saint-Pé-sur-Nivelle, gateway to the Basque Country. For the record, Charlie had sensibly spent the 3-second assembly time under the hire car with me, thereby leaving my wife free to supervise the whole operation herself. And a cracking job she made of it too. Those 3 years in the Soviet Army have not been wasted. With our miracle temporary accommodation safely erected, we were now free to set off for Biarritz, the intended location of our wedding anniversary dinner and unintended site of our young dog's painful accident. Driving from St. P, as we were calling it, because of the sacred urine that flows from its blocked public toilets, to the chic seaside resort of Biarritz, we had chance, like the cows at the side of the road, to ruminate on our surroundings. The Basque Country is a strange place, essentially because the Basques seem to have got their own everything. Their own flag, which looks like a Union Jack drawn by a child with a crayon. Their own symbol, which is like a psychedelic swastika, and their own language, which isn't like anything at all. They play pelota, which is the same as squash, except the players have bread baskets tied to their hands and play with a ball that would kill you if it hit you on the head. They have their own gâteau, although I suppose there's nothing particularly special about having your own gâteau in France. They even have their own version of the Highland Games, a sort of rustic superstars, but without David Vine. Their bullfighting, though, is the same as the Spanish variety. The one where 3 armoured men on armoured horseback stick spikes into a bull until it's almost dead, and then a very small man with a sword and a tablecloth and wearing children's trousers arrives to finish off the dying animal. And they want us to give Gibraltar back? Hands off. I have a theory which I believe explains the bizarreness of the French Basque Country. It's a smokescreen, a subterfuge, a clever ruse to confuse the police. Nowhere enjoying such a range of idiosyncratic customs and pastimes could possibly be harbouring dangerous terrorists that have hopped over the border from Spain. They must be hiding somewhere else, somewhere a lot more normal. We rolled into Biarritz, intellectually satisfied with our rumination on things Basque, but far from replete in the stomach department. We drove around for a while on our customary hunt for a non-existent parking space and finally found somewhere not all that far from our campsite, as it turned out. We jogged the 12 miles back into the centre of Biarritz and set about the task of selecting a nice place to eat. I have a surefire way of choosing a restaurant. I go in the first one I come to, no matter how much my wife shouts at me. It saves an awful lot of wandering about and neatly circumvents the kind of bickering that comes from hungry frustration. While we're on the subject of being overly structured, I also have a system for choosing wine. I go for the cheapest, always. Because, and this is one of the most difficult confessions I've ever had to make, I can't tell the difference between a bottle of wine that costs €35 and a large plastic container of the stuff which comes free with a litre of petrol. This doesn't stop me from pretending otherwise in company, of course. Like most people, I can hold a glass up to the light, swill its contents around for a while and say, nice colour. Probably, also like most people, I have no idea what I mean by this. Wine is either white, red or rosé, all of which are clearly nice colours, unlike blue. If somebody gave me a glass of blue wine, I wouldn't hold it up to the light and say, nice colour. I'd give it back to them. But that's never going to happen. So why are we always obliged to confirm what is patently obvious? On the off chance that we might one day be given something turquoise to taste? I'm being facetious. There's obviously a lot more to wine than just the fact that it comes in 3 colours. Some of it has got bubbles in, for example. With the restaurant picked out and my strategy for dealing with the tricky business of ordering something to drink at the ready, we sat down on the terrace. We secured Charlie to the table leg and took in our surroundings. Nice place, Biarritz, although not as warm as we might have hoped. There were a few dark-looking clouds looming on the horizon. I offered to sprint back to the car for my wife's cardigan, but understandably, she didn't want to put me to any trouble on the night of our wedding anniversary. And it would have taken me 8 hours to get there and back anyway. She shivered stoically. The long Russian winters had hardened her against the worst of anything the Atlantic could throw at us. It got colder. We got hungrier. On the positive side, the 45-minute wait for anyone to notice our existence did give us ample time to discuss the happy years of our wedded life. We chatted and sang songs to keep our spirits up. Charlie covered her head with her paws and sheltered as best she could under the table. Eventually, driven by who knows what sentiment, the waitress appeared with the menu, the English version. I hate it when this happens. I find it embarrassing, as if I've been rumbled. I always think it's a bit like being given the children's menu, or having it pointed out to the restaurant that you can't read. And the English version of the menu is never any use anyway. Knowing that the aloes is called the shad in English, or the barbu is apparently the brill, doesn't help me choose something nice to eat. I have no idea what a striped marlin looks like, let alone tastes like. It's not entirely true, I suppose. I could hazard a guess that it's striped and tastes of fish. The other thing about ordering food which I find unsettling is the concept of the set menu. The menu, as it's called here, inexplicably. You can never quite get what you want. You like the main course, but there's nothing on the list of starters you fancy. You want the tarte aux pommes, but not if you have to eat the goat's cheese. You end up haggling with your wife and then the waitress, and finally you're so hungry you order something you can't read, scribbled on a blackboard 20 meters away that turns out to be kidneys. Which is what happened. Very nice they were too. The main course finished, we didn't linger over our desserts. The clouds had positioned themselves overhead, and the first drops of rain were squeezing into the gaps left by the brightly coloured terrace parasols. The wind, not wishing to go unnoticed, was making a rapid climb up the Beaufort scale. It was time to go. I asked for the bill, but before the waitress had a chance to ignore me, the storm broke. A violent gust of wind ripped across the terrace and lifted the parasols out of their stands and carried them backwards towards our table. My wife and I took evasive action, aided in this by the fact that we weren't tied to the table leg like some members of our party. Charlie, fear driving adrenaline around her bloodstream, managed to tear herself free from her lead and escape the shower of sun umbrellas as they thundered into the ground. But sadly, in the process, she had somehow contrived to dislocate her hip. It took 2 hours of driving around and a drunken medical examination before we learnt that this was what was making our poor four-legged companion howl like a wolf. The vet, when we finally managed to track him down, was superb and proof of something that a lot of us have known all along. Alcohol does not impair your judgment. 1 degree away from paralytic, he was still able to examine, X-ray, diagnose and treat our dog. Brilliant! And if he hadn't passed out while he was explaining what we needed to do with the tablets he'd given us, I would certainly have considered paying him for his services. I hoisted the sleeping animal into the back of the car and we sped off. Back at the campsite, our Quecho self-assembly air tent, battered by the storm, seemed to have lost some of its miraculous appeal. So, with thoughts of a more comfortable convalescence, we decided to let Charlie stay in the back of the car for the night and not curl up under the canvas with us as previously planned. My wife and I, on the other hand, had no choice. We climbed into the damp interior and did our best to catch some sleep on the cold, hard floor. In the morning, I emerged shivering and tired. My kidneys, the ones that belonged to me and not the ones I'd eaten the night before, were bruised from the jagged rocks that had served as last night's mattress. My whole body ached as if it had recently taken part in a Basque festival of endurance or been hit repeatedly by a pelota ball. But however bad I was feeling, it couldn't compare to a dislocated hip. Poor Charlie. I went over to the car, bracing myself for the sight of our dog writhing in agony as the effects of the painkillers wore off. I carefully opened the door. Charlie leaped past me and bounded off after an extremely startled squirrel. No limping, no whimpering, in fact, no sign of her injury whatsoever. It was a miracle. Or was it? I watched Charlie as she dived under the campsite fence, paddled her way across a tributary of the Nivelle, and raced up the hill on the other side. Or are there just some amongst us who will go to any length to avoid sleeping in a tent?